boss loved that report I gave to him. Pumped I got it. It was awesome. I think I'm going to get a raise. I'm looking forward to that. Even the traffic this morning, it was great. I just cruised all the way, no problem. Oh, man. This has just been an awesome day, and I just love it. Oh, man, but it's tiring now, so it's time to come home, to rest, to relax just a little bit, to turn on, oh, yeah, the Facebook. Yeah, well, I just can't wait to check this out. What? The Smiths are on vacation again? They just went 6 months to Bahamas? Really? I don't need that anymore. Oh, wait a minute. Jonah's got a new girlfriend? When did that happen? How come he didn't tell me that? We're supposed to be good friends. Oh, it's pretty pathetic. Let's go over Instagram. That's so much better. Oh, party. It's Jeff, Jordan, Matt. Oh. David's there? Those are all my friends. What are they getting together and they didn't invite me? Well, that stinks. What am I, chopped liver? They forget me? Forget my telephone number? Let's see. I just put up my little post. Oh, 3 likes. Awesome. Oh. Hey. Hi, John. How you doing, man? How's my day? It's pathetic. Have you ever been there? We live in a culture that absolutely loves to compare, to assume. And I wonder sometimes what it does to our heart. I'd like to present some thoughts and ideas this morning that I have been wrestling with. And I'm not a big social media person, so don't assume that this is related necessarily to that. But I'm spending more time more introspective and saying, Lord, what are you trying to tell me these days? And a few weeks ago, I was kind of just, and I don't normally do this, I'm pretty logical when I study the Word, but I came to a passage of Scripture in Psalm 73. I don't have it up on the screen this morning, so if you've got a device to follow along, great. If you've got a Bible, that's even better, because then you can write notes. But as I came across Psalm 73 and I was reading it, I thought, man, this is 21st century stuff. This is not stuff just for 1,000 years before Christ. But I want you to listen to the words of Asaph for just a moment. Surely the Lord is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, stop there for a minute. What an honest reflection. God's good to the pure in heart, but whoa, I'm not right now in a state where I'm pure at heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped, and I nearly lost my foothold. The imagery that's created in my mind when I read this poetry is, that classic motif in Hollywood where the hero or the heroine is hanging onto the side of the mountain for dear life, and their feet are kind of looking for toe holes. And the psalmist says, I almost slipped. not just slipped, I nearly lost my foothold. This is strong language. The psalmist is saying, I almost left my faith. I almost turned my back on Yahweh. And as I read that, the Lord spoke and said, this is foundational stuff, Williamson. And he oftentimes talks to me that way, last name. Why did the psalmist almost walk away from the Lord? For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. I want you just to hone in on that word saw for just a minute. As I've gone through this psalm and tried to map it out, it's really clear to me that it's kind of broken into two chunks. And the first chunk is all about the psalmist seeing. The second part, which is way better than the first part, is about the psalmist understanding. Which leads me just to my first thought. We live in a culture in which we see a lot. But seeing is not always understanding. And what we see sometimes is not always reality. I'm expecting a few more amens as we move along. Look at what happens when the psalmist looks around. He says this, oh, those wicked people, number one, they have no struggles. Do you understand how far off he is right now? Because this isn't true, but it's what he sees. They don't have any struggles, those wicked people. Their bodies are healthy and strong. Yeah. They are free from the common human burdens, and they are not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They wear it, they shine it, and they clothe themselves with violence. The violence here is the desire to control. I will control you through my words, through my actions, through my power, through my money. And the psalmist looks and says, this is what these people are all about. They have calloused hearts. They have evil imaginations. They know no limits. They scoff and they speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. Verse 10 is perhaps the hardest verse in the psalm to interpret properly. Many different translations use slightly different variations on the word, and the NIV happens to say, therefore their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. Let me just suggest that as people try to figure out and interpret words, sometimes they'll take a spin and they'll say, well, this is what the verse means, therefore we're going to interpret it this way. So as you look through several different translations, you'll find that word that is translated here as they or their people is also translated as his people. And I think the best understanding of this verse is that God's people, when they look at those who are ungodly but looking like they're so successful, that God's people can be pulled away. Do you think that people who do not know the Lord are wealthier, healthier, in places of power and prestige more than God's people? There's the challenge. There are two thoughts that I just want to derive from this passage for you, and these are the two that the Lord laid in my heart. The two errors, if you will, of the psalmist. The first was the ability to compare. When I compare myself to someone else, I'm trying to evaluate my goodness against someone else's goodness. Or maybe I'm trying to evaluate my situation against somebody else's situation. Do you think that's right? I was an electrical engineer, and as I went through engineering, it was a 4-year degree. It was challenging, to say the least. It was interesting to me that we started with 60 electrical engineering students in second year. We graduated 28. That's a 50% plus attrition rate. The reason for that is because universities oftentimes are not interested in what you know as much as they're interested in what you know in comparison to the person next to you. Why? Because universities aren't going to give straight A's to everybody because all the world will look at the university and say, well, that university stinks. They're too easy. And so they will tell you right up front, you got to learn the stuff, but what's most important if you're going to graduate from this program is that the person on your left and the person on your right, you're better than them. Because that's how we're going to evaluate you. And so you write your tests, and I'm going to be honest, I got some tests in electronics that I had about a 30% on. Yeah, that's right, 30%. But at the end of that test, I got an A. Do you know why I got an A? Because 90% of the other people got a 25. Now, I know what you're saying. That's scary, Williamson, because these are the guys that are going out and building bridges and buildings and roads and all those other kind of things. Really? And this is the truth. Now, maybe things have changed since. I don't know. But I doubt it. Do you think it's fair to evaluate an engineering student or any student not based on what they know, not based on the circumstances, but based on how they relate to you? Anybody think that's fair? But brothers and sisters, in honesty, do we do this? Do we compare our situations in life with the person next to us, to the person on the net, to the person on Instagram, to our coworkers? We look at them and say, well, how come I don't got that? How come they're so good? How come they got so much? And I'm extremely challenged by this. Let me just suggest to you a couple of thoughts. Why are comparisons so bad? You know, it's even found in the 10 Commandments. You shall not covet your neighbor's stuff. 2 reasons, at least. Number 1, I have absolutely no idea the journey that that person or that person has been on. I have no idea. You know, they get an A and I get a B, but of course they probably studied for 40 hours for that exam and they deserved it. Maybe, I don't know. Oh, that person over there, they've got more money than I. Maybe they work harder than I do. Maybe that's just how God designed it, and let it be. And so for me to compare myself hurts me. And here's the second reason why comparison can be so hard. It usually leads to one of 2 states in my mind, either defeat or pride. What do I mean? If I look at that person over there and say, how come I don't have what they have? I might as well just give up and quit because I'm no good. I'm a loser. I stink. They got it. I don't. And therefore, I retreat and I turn away. Or I look at that person and say, hey, man, I'm so much better than you. And all of a sudden, pride rises up within me. And both of these attitudes push the Lord away. You know, it's intriguing to me in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. And again, I just want to jot the verse down. That's great. But Paul writes this: we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with someone else who commends themselves. When they measure themselves, get this, by themselves, and they compare themselves with themselves, they're not wise. Paul knew the danger of comparing. And so he says, we're not going to play that game. We simply don't know what God can do with us. Let me remind you of a story that I'm sure you know so well. But a favorite leader of mine. He started a business with a partner in Illinois. The business struggled, the partner died, and my leader friend was left with nothing but debt. He started another business. It too failed and died, leaving him again with more debt. He decided politics would be his thing. And so he ran for the Illinois state legislature, lost. He decided to run for the Speaker of the House in the Illinois House of Representatives, lost. He tried to get into U.S. Congress, lost. Twice he attempted to get into the Senate in the United States, lost them both. And then he received the nomination for the vice presidency, and he lost that too. You know, you can look at my friend and you can say, man, oh man, that's terrible. Nothing good gonna come of that guy. Except that 8 years later, he was nominated for the presidency of the United States and became what I would suggest was the best president that ever lived. His name, of course, was Abraham Lincoln. You don't know what God can do with you. You may say, I'm weak, I don't have what they have, but that's the kind of person God is looking for. He's not interested in you saying, hey, look at how good I am. Look at the power I've got. Look at the authority I've got. He's looking at you and saying, will you trust me? Will you follow me? Will you love me? Will you give me every fiber of your being and let me pour my power through you and accomplish incredible things? Incredible things. The second thing that I want to draw from the psalmist's struggle is not just the issue of comparison. It is the issue of assumptions. Assumptions. Why do we as human beings make so many assumptions? And by the way, assumption goes something like this. I know what you're thinking. I know who you are. I know your character. And I don't know it because of knowledge. I know it because I just know it. We assume things about one another. Why? I would suggest that perhaps, we want to observe things. And when we observe other people, we kind of put them through the filter of what we are and what we're going through. And that taints our ideas. Let me suggest at least 4 that I draw from these passages. Assumptions. First assumption that we oftentimes make is about me and you. This is what we say. You know, when I screw up, when I get angry, it's always a matter of circumstances. You know, I'm stressed, I'm tired, I'm too much work. And so we say, oh my goodness, when I blow up, when I'm this, when I'm that, that's just because of the circumstances around me. But when you do it, it's all about character. You're just that kind of person, aren't you? Can we stop for just a moment? And when we are in the midst of a conflict and we're ready to make an assumption, can we stop and pause and ask ourselves, why do I think that this is true? The second time that we oftentimes make assumptions is when we assume that a certain person is a certain way because they're part of a category. Some people will look at a man and say, every man's a loser. Some people will look at a woman and say, weak. We'll look at, I don't know, somebody who maybe is a librarian, and we'll say, librarians, what do they know? We'll prejudge, we'll make assumptions based on who they are or their circumstances. Or how about this third one? We'll make assumptions about people's character based on what they have, what they do, how popular they are, how powerful they are. Let me get very political for just a moment. Can I do that? Just recently in the United States of America, and the United States of America politically is split right down the middle. 50% love Trump, 50% don't. Did he just say the T word? Yeah, I did. Every one of you, just in the last 10 seconds, had an emotional response. Every one of you did. 50% of you just went, and 50% of you just went, yeah, like him. How much of our opinions are based in truth? Don't know. But this is what God is speaking into my heart these days. When I look at people, do I immediately snap to an assumption? I've heard people say he's the Antichrist. I've heard people say that he's next thing to God. Here's the truth. He's neither. So, Williamson, how do you handle such a thing? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not here to give you a political view, and I'm not going to. But I will say this. When I think of a political leader today, my immediate reaction is not, ugh. Today, my immediate reaction is, what would I do if I were him? And then I remember, what's Scripture tell me to do? Yeah, 1 Timothy, pray for those that are in power above you. Even people that I may not agree with. Here's the fourth assumption sometimes we make, and it's assumptions about God. God's my friend. I agree. God's my bud. God's the person I have coffee with every morning. Okay. He's also our king. He is also our sovereign. He is also our God. And every time in the New Testament I read a passage in which Jesus appears before his disciples, especially after his ascension, people fall on their face as if they were dead. And I think to myself, he is my friend, but he is also the God of this universe. And sometimes the God of this universe may say to Williamson, you will never pastor a megachurch. And I got to be okay with that. Sometimes he limits us. Sometimes he expands us. But he's God. He's God. So I'm learning slowly but surely to be really careful about the assumptions that I make about our Lord. I want to try to illustrate, I know my time is going really super fast. I appreciate that, brother. This may or may not appeal to you, but I'm hoping that maybe this will make sense. 100 years ago, a French mathematician developed a little book, one that I own a copy of. And in that little book, he posited what would life be like if we lived in a two-dimensional world. We live in a three-dimensional world, right? We can look that way, we can look that way, and we can look that way. But what if we lived in a world that had no up? Everything was two-dimensional. Everything was absolutely flat. So let me introduce you today to Flatland. Here is Flatland. And you may be saying, Williamson, this is weird, but that's okay. Just bear with me for just a second, will you? There are 4 characters that I've got in my flatland. We've got Fred. We've got Wilma. We got Barney. And we got Betty, yeah. You've heard of Flatland before. And we've got Fred's house. And it's right here. It's flat, because there's no such thing as up in Flatland, right? You got that. You got that. Well, Fred and Wilma and Barney and Betty are having a barbecue one day. And so they're outside Fred's house, and they're having a really good time. And you know, Fred, he wants to go into the house. So here's Fred, and he goes marching over here, and he opens a door, and he goes into the house, and he closes the door. Now, let me test you. Does Wilma and Barney and Betty, can they see Fred right now? Of course not. There's no such thing as up, only 2 dimensions. And so Fred is in his house. Now, I need to say this. There is a 5th character in my story, and it's me. My name in the story is God Bob. Everybody say God Bob. Yeah. I live in 3 dimensions. I have a length and a width and a height. And God Bob is watching over his land. Now, can these guys, can they figure out who I am? Can they see me? No, because they can only look, and they see this tiny little sliver of me, right? Because they can't look up. There's no such thing as up. But me, I'm God Bob. God Bob can see Betty and Barney and Wilma. And God Bob can see Fred, too, all at the same time. Because I'm not bound by up. I live in up. Now, God Bob has a little bit of a sense of humor. And so God Bob says, I'm going to pull one over on Fred. And I go, achoo! And I sneeze. And I sneeze so hard that I blow Fred clear into up. And for the first time in Fred's life, he's going, oh my goodness. Now, what can Fred see? Barney, Betty, the house, and for the very first time, he can see God Bob. Now, I say, hey, Fred, nice to meet you, man. And Fred is going, where am I? I can't even describe, look at all the things I can see. And I say, well, Fred, it's been sliced, but, you know, I'm just going to let gravity do its thing. Gravity? What's gravity? And Fred comes settling down. What just happened to Wilma and Betty and Barney? Anybody? What did all of a sudden they begin to see? Fred. They began to see Fred. Fred just popped in out of nowhere. And they go, oh, Fred, oh my goodness, what happened? And Fred said, I could see you, I could talk, I could understand, I could see inside the house. And they all say, Fred, where were you? And Fred goes, I was. But there's no such thing as up. And Fred is lost for words. Now, God Bob really, really wants to minister to Fred and Barney and Betty. But they can't discern me. And so I have to take something that's two-dimensional, and I have to insert it into their world. It's got me a picture on it. It's me. It's probably got a ton of biometrics too, but that's beside the point. God Bob needs to come in. Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians. I was caught up to the third heaven, where I saw things that I could not understand. He couldn't put them to words because he was taken into the presence of God. God needed to take who he was because we couldn't touch him, we couldn't measure him, we couldn't see him, we couldn't fully understand him, and he had to find a way of inserting himself into our three-dimensional world. What I want you to see from my little story here this morning is that there is a perspective that you and I don't fully grasp or understand unless we are connected to God. That perspective, brothers and sisters, is how we interrelate to things, how we interrelate to people, and how we interrelate to God. This is my prayer, and it has been my prayer since the day I got saved. God, please give me wisdom. Give me insight. Give me help, because every time I look at somebody, I make assumptions. Every time I look at somebody who's got more than me, I make a comparison. Every time I look at somebody who's got less than me, I think, I guess I'm doing okay. And I'm realizing, brothers and sisters, that this is so detrimental to my heart. There is only one person I want to compare myself to, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm tired of trying to compare me to someone else. And could I make just this most passionate plea to you? When you find in those moments that you want to start to compare, ask yourself this: how am I doing with Jesus? Am I pleasing him? Am I honoring him? Is my cry above all other cries to be like him? Let me finish in Psalms, and then I'll take you quickly to the New Testament, and we'll be done. The psalmist says this: when I tried to understand all of this in verse 16, it troubled me deeply until I entered the sanctuary of God, and then I understood their final destiny. You see, it was only in the presence of God that the psalmist was finally able to discern and understand that just because it looks like somebody's doing really good, maybe they're really not. Maybe they're really not. It is interesting to me that Jesus gives us one parable that actually speaks to the idea of how we are to compare ourselves with the world. And in the 5 minutes or so that's remaining, I want to exegete this parable with you. I'm going to tell you this. Theologians consider this the hardest parable in the entire Bible to understand. And we're going to rip it apart right now. Is that okay? I am in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. And I'm going to just thumbnail this thing for you because I think it's important for you to understand its context. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man. Sorry. Wow, I'm losing my technology here. There we go. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be my manager any longer. Wow. Dude's about to get fired. Let me just make a couple of points here. And again, I'm not going to take time to dig through the theology of it, but I just want you to understand the culture. In the first century, even as in the 21st century, in Arab cultures like this, oftentimes a rich person would hire somebody to watch over their land. Sometimes they're called a steward. This was a steward who had been hired to watch over a rich man's property. And how does that work? Well, there were farmers, and they wanted to use the land of the rich man, and so they would enter into a contractual agreement. They would say, hey, rich man, if you give me that acre of land over there, I'm going to grow stuff, and I'm going to give you a percentage of what I grow. Or I'm going to give you like 60 bushels, and I'll keep the rest. It's kind of rent. These contracts were binding. They were legal. Bad things happened if you broke the contract. This rich man is pictured in this parable as somebody who is godly and righteous. But his steward isn't. It's interesting in the Greek when we read, what is this I hear about you? It's a word that means a continuous action. I keep hearing this about you, steward. You're making a little bit of money under the table. Now, again, in this culture, that was not uncommon, but this guy was doing something very unethical. He was stealing. What I want you to see in the parable is that this steward gives no defense. Right? Rich man says, give an account of all your management. The steward can't. He is silent. He is guilty. As guilty as sin. The manager says to himself, what shall I do now? Now, again, just in context, when this kind of a situation happens, and it's actually spoken of in some of the Jewish writings, and it's very cultural, if I were to fire my steward, that firing would take place immediately. He no longer has authority to do anything in my name. But it becomes binding when he brings me the books, the accounting books. And so Mr. Stewart has to go home and get the books. And as he's walking, he's thinking to himself, I'm hooped. I can't do anything. He thinks to himself, oh my goodness, I'm in this community. I can't leave my community. They very seldom left their community in that day. And so he was kind of hooped. He said, I'm going to lose my job. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'm going to do something that will make it so that the people of this community will love me. And so he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked them first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil. 900 gallons? You have no idea how much this guy is filthy rich. I mean, this is how much it costs to rent the land. 900 gallons a year. And so the manager, the steward, said, give me your bill. Sit down quickly. Make it 450. Ooh. Now, you got to ask yourself, what's going on here? Is this person who's renting the land for 900 gallons of olive oil, is he corrupt? No, he's actually not. It was not unheard of for contracts to be rewritten like this, especially if the crops were bad. You know, you get insects, you get hot, you get too much water, you don't get a lot. It was very common. And so this steward, unbeknownst to anybody else, he comes in and he says, hey, come here, 900 gallons, rewrite the contract, sign it in your own hand, make it 450. You can imagine that just saved you 50% of your rent. Thank you. And he looks at the manager and says, that's good. And you can imagine what the manager's doing, the steward. He's saying, I talked the old guy into doing this. You know, and he paints himself in a good light. The second one comes along. How much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. Take your bill, make it 800. Wow. Now here's the key. What a generous master you have. What a gracious master you have. That rich man, oh, he's awesome. He's helping us out in a difficult time. The unjust steward brings the books back to the rich man. And the rich man looks at them and looks at the steward and says, well done. He commends the dishonest manager. because he acted shrewdly. Jesus goes on and he says, sorry, tech is dying again. You should go do likewise. And that's what makes this parable so difficult to understand. I know what you're saying. It's like a magic trick. Pastor Bob, tell me the secret. Okay. The master is in a tricky situation. So is the steward. The steward is looking to make a job for himself. He wants to take care of his future, but he can't. But this is what the steward learned about the rich man. He is a man of grace and of forgiveness and of mercy. How did he learn that? Because you will note that the rich man never rebukes the dishonest steward. You will note that he never threatens him, he never calls him names, and he never throws him in jail. The law would have allowed all of those things, plus he would have made the steward have to give back everything. But the master doesn't. The master looks at this unjust steward and says, I forgive you. And so the unjust steward says, I have no plan. I have no action. So this is what I'm going to do. I am going to throw myself on the mercies of the rich man. And he does. And so the rich man looks at the books, and he knows. Right now, the entire village is having a celebration. Do you know why? Because the rich man is so awesome. He is so good. He is so filled with grace. He is so loving and kind, which, by the way, he is. But the rich man knows, if I go back into the village and say, this guy cooked the books, every one of those villagers would go, "Arr." So what's the rich man to do? He knows he's gracious. He knows he's loving. He knows he's kind. And so he takes the sin of the unjust steward and he says, I will take it upon myself. Brothers and sisters, let me leave you with this final thought. I can make all kinds of comparisons to people in my life. I can attempt to make assumptions about them. But what God really says is, Williamson, you're just like the unjust steward. You got nothing. Will you fall completely upon my grace? My mercies? Will you trust me, even though you've made all kinds of mistakes? Will you trust me? Because I love you with a love that never ends. And if the God of this universe is like the rich ruler who says, I trust you and I'm going to absorb your sin, can I trust him in a life? And instead of comparing myself, instead of making assumptions, to recognize him and say, to you alone do I give my life. Father, we've covered a lot of ground this morning, Old Testament, New Testament. And I've tried really hard to show my brothers and sisters that you have a perspective in life that I can't even begin to understand. But what I want them to see more than anything else is that you are a God of love and mercy and grace unlike anything that we could ever understand. And you empower us to do incredible things. So when I look at the unjust steward, when I look at somebody who's messed up, I don't want to play the comparison game. And I don't want to make assumptions. I want to see you. I want to see you. I want to be the kind of person that is honest and open and asks questions of my brothers and sisters when I don't understand. That I want to be a person that knows how to give and to fall upon grace. Grace. Because that's what you give us. Across this auditorium now, with your eyes closed, just between you and the Lord, let me just ask you a couple questions. Do you find yourself sometimes playing the comparison game? And it's okay to admit. Can I invite you to simply say, Lord, forgive me? Don't want to do that anymore. Would you be willing to say to him, Lord, when I go down those roads, could you please steer my path so that I see you? Let me ask you a second question. Perhaps you are like me and you make a lot of assumptions. That you'd rather not ask questions, you'd rather just assume. Would you be willing to say to your God today, Lord, forgive me. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to be a person of great grace, who's not afraid to ask questions, and who actually looks at people and kind of believes the best. Let me say this. If you have said yes to either one of those prayers today, you've honored the Lord. You've made him rejoice. And expect he's going to do incredible things. Because he loves you so much. I'm going to invite you to stand with me. Jeff, if I could get you just to come back and lead us just in one last song as the Spirit leads you. Let's join together in worship one more time, brothers and sisters.